And we are back on the build phase. I'm Mr. Ben, and today I am joined by PJ, our Ohio regional champion, and we're going to talk about his whole journey here in a moment. But first, I just want to say congrats, champ, and welcome to the show.
Thank you, thank you. Yeah, happy to be here.
The first time people come on the show, I always like to take a minute to sort of like step back to their experience with gaming before Versus. So, was Versus your first card game? What kind of like games captured your imagination previously, and like walk us into your experience with Versus?
Okay, yeah. So Versus was definitely not my first card game. So I grew up with Pokemon, but I was so little. I didn't know how to actually play. So like me
Sure.
and my brother would play Pokemon, and I'd be like, "Oh, my Pokemon's cooler than yours," so I win. So we would just have like little debates on like which Pokemon was cooler, basically not knowing like what any of the numbers meant.
I think that's a
So because we
perfectly
were in
valid way to engage with the game. The art is an important
yeah.
part of it.
And we both watched the show, so we kinda knew, like, the type differences, so, like, we were like, "Oh, yeah, this Onix is not gonna beat this water type Pokemon," or whatever, so we kinda knew that, but, like, we didn't know any of the numbers, and then that was, like, when I was around, like, 1st grade, and then soon after that, Yu-Gi-Oh! Caught on, and everyone switched to that, so did I. And
Okay.
that one I actually understood how to play because they played on the show, even though I don't think they followed any of the rules on the show at all.
Yeah, probably not.
They just made them up as they went. They're like, "This card does this because I say so." But yeah, at that time I was starting to learn like the basics of card games, and we had after school clubs for Yu-Gi-Oh! So it was like kind of more of a casual thing.
Sure. Did you just play at like school and at your kitchen table, or did you even go to the game store?
Yeah, so there was a game store by my house that we would walk to, but it sold mostly comics. They had some Yu-Gi-Oh cards, but they didn't run too many events. So
Sure.
like they did every now and then. So I would watch other people play if they were running an event and like shop around, but I never really actually played competitively.
Oh, okay. Getting into the tournament scene, like I know when I first started playing Magic, it was kind of intimidating to even be around those guys. Was that part of it, or were you just not interested in competing?
Um, it was just that I didn't know where events were and like when they were
Sure.
happening, and I always had fun playing, so, like, for me, it started as a fun thing, not a competitive thing. The first competitive thing I did was actually 4 Versus. That was the Venomverse format in Florida. Sinister 6 everywhere, yeah. So, a lot of mirror matches that day. That was my first, like, actually competitive card tournament ever.
Well, that's very cool. So did you go straight from Yu-Gi-Oh into the old versus system?
I never played the old Versus system, so, um, that was I didn't start playing Versus until Civil War came out about then.
Oh, wow.
Um
Okay.
Yeah. I didn't know anything about it. Roland, who runs the resource row, did like a thing where we would he would play as Thanos and we would all try to beat him with Avengers, which was like a fake way of playing versus, but it was actually the cards. That's how
Sure.
I first played versus was like a free for all basically,
So
or a
like a
four against
raid kind of
yeah.
before the boss modes came out?
Yeah, so it was like right when the boss modes were coming out. So he had the boss powers and we were all just Avengers trying to beat him. We
Oh,
were on a
cool.
team against him and we still lost, so
So is that how he pulled you into the game? Was like, hey, come be part of this like team and try to take on Thanos?
yeah, it was just an event with just friends because I knew him outside of cards, like, we grew up as friends, and I met him in college,
Oh, cool.
so
I always like hearing stories about our community members like bringing more people into Versus. Like, if there's one thing I could wish for on my genie lamp, it would be that more people would find out how awesome this game is.
yeah, we
um,
tried to bring our other friend in, and he didn't catch on, he didn't like the formations and the ranged combat ability, and he thought it was dumb that certain heroes would lose to other heroes, so I wonder what he would think about the wrestlers beating Galactus with, like, chairs and stuff.
yeah, I So there is something to be said with a card game. You sort of got the like dials of like flavor and simulation, and
Yeah.
sometimes, like often in our game, Danny and Ben will turn the dial way up on flavor, and sometimes that does erode the like simulation aspect. But at the end of the day, like I want cards that are fun more than I want cards that accurately represent comic level powers or whatever.
Yeah. So that was definitely the hardest part of learning was like the formations and who can attack where. That actually took the longest to learn versus, I would say.
So how long was it? Did you play multiple games in the raid style, or was it you played it once like, hey, I can play this versus other people, I want to do that?
So yeah, so he said, this is not the actual right way to play. So we played a couple rounds just to see if we could win. We never did. But at this point, Roland had already played, and this was our first time sitting down and looking at the cards.
Sure.
And he's like, this is not the normal way that people play. I'm like, oh, really? And then he's like, yeah, there's this store up in Centerville called Epic Loot that runs the events every month. And at this point, they were in like a mall, though. They weren't where the current store is, but they were in like a little mall. So we drove the hour up there one weekend, and that was the first time I actually played like real verses, I would say.
Well, that's cool. I know the boss battle. I remember you and Roland destroying me during during the build phase boss battle event. So
Yeah.
certainly your skills transferred through from your first experience to that one.
I don't know. Roland would say I took a long time to learn. I think I did too, but like, yeah, it was really a lot of practice of just like casual events where I grind my versus teeth, I would say.
Do you feel like your Yu-Gi-Oh skills were helpful, or did they kind of get in the way? I know you mentioned that getting the formations and the rows figured out was something that was a little bit harder. Um, I've definitely noticed some of the preconceived notions I have from Magic and other games when I came into Versus, I struggled with as well. Do you feel like your experience helped you or maybe hindered you in learning Versus in some ways?
I think it more hindered because like I was making so many unoptimal attacks because like in Yu-Gi-Oh it's just like power level basically, and I there's not really plot twists. There's like traps that you can fall into that they lay, but if they have a trap because they laid it.
Hmm.
Usually, well, this is old Yu-Gi-Oh! I don't know what it is now. It's probably crazy now. I don't lost track of what they're doing now, but you usually know like what they have. So I'd be like, oh, okay, my guy's bigger than you. I'll just swing in here. Don't need to worry about formation. And then they all of a sudden play a plot twist and I lose the combat. And I'm like, oh, I should not have done that.
Yeah, getting
So
punished for our decisions certainly teaches a lot of lessons to the early card player for sure. So we went from kind of grinding your teeth in versus in the casual setting, being introduced to the game in a raid mode, which I don't know how many people can say that. That's pretty cool. But when it came to this event, did you approach this format and preparing for this event with the intent of coming in dead serious, or were you coming at it, hey, I just like to go and compete? What was your mindset approaching preparation?
so for preparing, I this is the most I've prepared for any format probably. Like I had the most practice games for this format with the guys on Buckeye. Um, for sure. Butcher and Kevin Butcher tested a lot. Earl also tested a lot with me. So there were weeks where I was putting in multiple games a day. And luckily I was able to let the wife know like, hey, I'm playing versus today. Sorry, I'm gonna be a little busy, and she was cool with it, luckily. But that was definitely the most I've played. So I was definitely giving it my best shot this go around.
How did you feel about your preparation? So the day the event comes, did you feel like you were in a good place? Like, man, I got this meta figured out. My hard work is going to pay off. Or I keep kind of relating these questions to things I go through. I know some tournaments, even if I've played 1,000 games in preparation, when it comes to tournament day, I'm like, oh man, I didn't prepare enough. What was your headspace approaching the event?
So I knew I practiced as much as I could. The meta reads are a little harder for me, especially. Like I usually don't. It's like throwing stuff at the wall and see what sticks when I practice, which is probably not the best method. But metas are always kind of hard to read. But I knew for sure that there was going to be one Silver Surfer there, and that was Butcher because he was pretty vocal about what he was playing. and I knew that Magneto could not beat Silver Surfer, so that made my option a lot easier. I'm like, even if I sit down and I play Magneto and I never see Butcher all day, I'm gonna feel bad about it because I know I sat down with a deck that can't win because we tested it so many times.
Sure. So it sounds like Magneto was your second choice, and he got outclassed by the Surfer.
Yeah, so if you've ever swung in with like 30 counters and then you get hit with a power cosmic and you lose all those counters, it doesn't feel good. It doesn't
No.
feel good at all. Like, yeah, that's not gonna work. And 7 health beats 5 almost every time. So that was what
Hmm.
the decision came down to on the day of. I'm like, I could play this Magneto deck that I feel good about. I actually felt good about that more against Pixie Max than I did Surfer, but I did not think there were going to be too many Pixie Max players.
Well, let's talk about Pixie Max for a second because this is one of those. A lot of buzz is generated around just how negative the play experience can be when a Pixie Max deck goes off on turn two and you just lose on the spot. That sucks a lot. Um,
Yeah.
But every time we have one of these like really negative experience decks in the format, there's people who say, well, find solutions for it. And there's people who say, well, maybe this should have been banned. Did you have a strong opinion on the existence of this combo in the format? How did you feel about that?
I mean, I knew the combo existed, and I'm like, if people play it, they're gonna play it. If I lose, I lose. If they get what they need, I'm just gonna lose. So, but the way I looked at it, I'm like, well, who would actually bring this to a tournament that I think is gonna be there? And I didn't know exactly who was gonna come, but I knew it was gonna be a lot of Buckeye people and a lot of Apex people. And I knew what most of the Buckeyes were on from testing with them, and I knew how they were working Maximus into Mr. Fantastic, and I had more time to build up against that than I did like a turn two standard Pixie Max. Pixie comes down, gets the max out, you lose turn two.
Mm-hmm.
So uh, I'm like, I feel okay with the matchup against Mr. Fantastic when playing Silver Surfer, and I knew the Apex guys were not going to play Pixie Max because that's not what they do.
No, that's not on brand for those dudes at all.
Yeah, and I thought it was gonna be mostly Buckeye and Apex people there, and I was right. So, I mean, but yeah, that's so going into it, I knew that it was a possibility, but I viewed it as if they get what they get, they're gonna win, and I'll just move on to the next game.
That is a super healthy mindset. I've certainly said, man, I wish I could have that mindset with those combo decks, but then I get beat on turn two and I want to like flip the table 17 times, you know?
Yeah. Well, we practiced against it too, and I'm like, as long as I don't get off on turn two, I have a chance, and that's all I need. So.
hmm Okay, well let's talk about the deck a little bit. Was there anything? Clearly, Surfer ended up being the most played character. I think the reasons why the Super Powers format plays well with Silver Surfer are kind of obvious on his face with his level up condition requiring so many locations. Um, let's talk about your deck. Were there cards that you felt really made or broke this matchup? Was there stuff that you included that really worked out well for you in your rounds? How do you feel about the choices you made that actually went into the 60?
So for the longest time, I started off with thinking I needed more characters. So I was playing like 12 5 drops, I think. I was playing at one point like Invisible Woman, Caledonia, She Hulk, or no, not She Hulk, She Thing, um, and Invisible Boy on 5. So I'm like, yeah, I need to make sure that I get all these characters out, that I have stuff that I can stand together with, was basically my mindset. The more characters I get out, the more likely stand together would work against the big superpower combos that I was afraid of.
Mm-hmm.
Like Crystal or Maximus or whatever they wanted to pay 4 locations for.
Yeah, if there
Um
was ever a time to play Crystal, it seems like this was the format.
yeah. And Osh was running that in Buckeye League. Buckeye League is great for figuring out what people are doing in the meta also. Um
Yeah.
so
Shout out
yeah,
to Buckeye
I
League.
saw that first. Yeah, I saw that firsthand. Osh was not messing around with that crystal deck. That was one deck I did not want to see, and I was glad it didn't show up. So, but yeah, so that's where I started with it. But I mean, it was such a mixed bag. I was still not hitting my characters, even though I had so many, and it just didn't feel right. It didn't flow right. I wasn't on curve. So I'm like, I need to take some of these out for plot twists. I ended up going with In Good Hands, which um I know Butcher was against. He was running, I think, Powerhouse instead of In Good Hands. So the two
Hmm.
things I found in testing were most important were having ways to pump Surfer or protect him if I get in a bad spot. And then the other most important thing that I think other people weren't as on as me is I had three Doctor Doom and three Mr. Fantastics. I could not miss the negative zones.
Oh
That
wow,
was the
yeah.
huge thing. So I'm like, if I miss these negative zones, these games aren't going to go the way I want them to. Because that's basically the way I closed the door on any match was negative zone.
Okay.
So that's what I found. So I think that was the main difference. I don't know. I looked at all the lists for Surfer; they were all slightly different. They had staples, but I think that was the main difference. Is I never missed that, and I got lucky with the Earths all day. The other thing that was pretty big, um, when we were testing, David was on the Bark Brothers, so we could test against that. And he would put in alien manhunters just to use up that extra space that we were all wasting for a long time. So a lot the space was just getting wasted and just sat there. And Dave's like, "We're gonna put in this alien manhunter to use the space." And so that gave Butcher the idea to put in the one what plot twist is it? Nova Core.
Oh sure.
Yeah, so the Nova Core flipped a couple games for me too when we were playing in Swiss and in the top cut.
Yeah, that card's really
So
annoying.
that yeah, so because for a long time in testing, I'm like, oh yeah, I have this free space. I'm probably never going to use it. That's okay. I don't need it. But Butcher's like, no, let's just put the one Nova Core in it, and if we hit it, it's going to be huge, and it was. So shout out to Butcher on that one.
Nice. Um, so as we move into Swiss rounds, were there notable plays, things where your deck worked out really well, things that kind of let you down? Like what was your day in Swiss like? I mean, obviously we know the end of the story is the championship belt being wrapped around you. So it couldn't have been that rough of a
Yeah.
day in Swiss, but what were some of the notable events that took place?
Well, it definitely started out interesting. So the first match, I sat down against Mitch and Dark
Oh geez.
Phoenix. Yep. Yeah, it is. I don't know if anyone's ever played Mitch, but it's not fun, especially in tournaments. He's a really good player. So I'm like, this is a heck of a start to my day. But my whole mantra of the day was whatever happens, happens. So I'm like, all right, we'll just play this game and whatever happens, happens. And so long story short, we played Mitch actually had Proteus in his deck for Dark Phoenix, which unfortunately is not a card with a superpower. So
Mm-hmm.
he got a TKO on that one.
That's rough.
That's definitely rough. And I did not want to win that way. I still haven't given him his rematch yet, but I promised Mitch we will still play. I've just been taking a little break this week.
I think that's fair. You've earned it.
Yeah.
Well, that is unfortunate, but I think it goes to show that we should all have like charity in our hearts when we look at misplays and mistakes at the table. If somebody as sharp as Mitch, one of the best players we have in our game, can make that kind of mistake, hey, we can all make those kinds of mistakes. We are all capable of choosing the wrong line, putting the wrong card in the deck. So I think we should go easy on folks when these kinds of things happen.
Yeah. And the silver lining there was I think Mitch will agree is that we caught it first round and he was able to switch out his Proteuses for Earths, which aren't ideal, but I mean, he had negative zone too. So I think at least it wasn't when he was cutting to top eight. I think that would have been a
Yeah.
lot worse.
Uh, that actually happened recently. Not to hijack this to talk about a different game, but in Star Wars Unlimited, recently there was a player who made it all the way to the top eight. And in that game, you have your deck list and you hand it to your opponent and they look it over before you play. And all day long,
Hmm.
he was handing people a 48 card list because he just left two cards off his list. And it didn't get caught until top eight. And then he got DQ'd and ninth place took his spot. Like, because essentially there's no way to like unscrew that up. He presented an illegal list every single round. Like,
Yeah.
what a horrible way to end your day.
Yeah. So at least it gave Mitch a fighting chance. I think he was close. I don't know exactly how he finished, but I think he was close to
Yeah.
top eight.
Well, if there's any
Um,
player that can fight back from, throwing the first game, it's probably somebody like Mitch.
yeah. So that was the first game, and so it was already an interesting start. The other interesting thing that was actually the very next round is Tevin had actually lost to Vern um, in his game, but they entered it as Tevin had won. So I
Oh
thought I
no.
was getting pared down. I thought I was
Yeah.
getting pared down. I'm like, oh, this is great. I got a TKO and a pair down first 2 rounds. This is going exactly how I thought it would.
Dude, that
But
destroys your tiebreakers. Did that mess with your head at all? Like, did
yeah,
that kind of put you in a bad mood, or were you able to, hey, whatever happens, happens, and just zen your way through it?
I zened my way through it still because like I knew it was bad for tiebreakers, but I'm like, as long as I win, I don't need to rely on tiebreakers. So that was my focus was just trying to win as many games as I could.
That's a great attitude. I love it.
So yeah, I thought I got pared down, which I guess the computer didn't pare me down, but it really did because he was 0-1 and they ended up fixing it somehow. I don't know. David and Rollin uh figured it out, I guess. I don't know.
Hmm.
I think it wonked the results a little bit, but I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, TOs are always doing the best they can. Again, like it's kind of funny. This is coming up back to back with the illegal card in Mitch's deck thing, but everybody's allowed to make the
Yeah,
occasional mistake. We should have some charity. I mean, at the tournament table, you're stuck with the mistake. You don't get to take it back. But I'm not going to make fun of somebody for it.
yeah. And believe me, there are plenty of mistakes that I made all day too. I talked about him with David a lot, but uh he's Vern and I and David agreed both that this was probably the um best unclean game of verses that we've played, or like the most play mistakes in a championship
Oh wow.
on
Okay.
both of our sides. So we'll get to that when we talk about Top Cut. But the rest of the day, I'm trying to think what stuck out. Butcher was actually my first mirror match for Surfer, which you don't want to ever do mirror matches against someone you play tested a bunch with.
Yeah, that sucks.
Um, that's always the worst when you sit down with someone you play tested a bunch because you know what they're doing and they know what you're doing. Um, but I mean, all day in Swiss and in the top eight, except for one game, I was hitting my Earth, which is huge for Silver Surfer.
Hmm.
So I mean, everything was kind of just I don't know if it was luck or I don't know, but everything was weird but going my way for some reason.
Hey, you
So,
take the luck when it comes your way. That's because it
yeah,
doesn't always come your way.
no, it definitely doesn't. So, like, even when I was making mistakes, my opponent would make mistakes too. So it was a weird feeling. It was a weird day.
Uh, so
So
as we come
yeah.
through Swiss rounds and we get to top cut, you get to take a look at everybody else's deck lists. And you can kind of
Mhm.
sketch out, well, if I beat this guy, then I have to face one of these two guys. It'll probably be this person. So you can kind of look at your like path to the championship.
Yeah.
How confident did you feel looking at the players you had to face, the decks you had to face? What was your thought process kind of going into that top eight?
So my goal all day was just to make top eight. That was the goal coming into the store. So I already hit my goal. So I
Nice.
viewed it as anything that happens on top of this was the cherry on top. Because I viewed it as I had never top eighted in a competitive event. I've done it like in side events, but those are side events.
Sure.
Um, so I mean, there's debate in the community if side events count. I think
I
they
think
count.
I think they count. I mean, a premier event maybe counts a little more, but side events still count, in my opinion.
I think without the side events, I wouldn't feel like I could do anything in the normal events. I feel like it's great practice. If you treat those like normal events and you run through those, it'll it'll give you the confidence that you need when you go into the top eight, I think. Because I felt like I could beat any deck that I sat against. I knew the surfer matchup was kind of a coin toss.
Hmm.
So I expected to play at least one surfer in the top eight. Um, and Butcher, I asked Butcher if he wanted to practice mirror matches, and he said no. So we never actually ran the mirror in practice.
Okay. Did that
That
affect
was
your
an interesting
confidence
choice.
in the inevitable mirror, or did it just
No, because
okay?
I had already played 2 mirror matches that day. I already played Butcher and Vern, and I went second against Vern, and I still won, so I knew I could handle the mirror match. And
Great.
I had thought about it when making my deck, like, what lines do I need to play in the mirror? So even though I never practiced it, I had definitely thought about it. Um, so there were decks that I didn't wanna see. I knew Patrick was on Dark Phoenix and Zombies, and I didn't want to see that.
Sure.
But I'm not a fan of playing against the zombies for sure. There's been lots of games where I get the virus and they just hide from me, and there's nothing I can feel like I can get out of it. Um, so that's never fun. So I was worried about that. Um, I wasn't really worried about the 2 bark monster decks. Sorry, Tevin and Bert, but I wasn't worried about those as much.
What was it about the Bark matchup that you felt more confident in it?
We had practiced against it a lot, so I had a plan of attack against it. Basically, if you get the invisible one off the table, the rest kind of takes care of itself. Um,
Okay.
so I felt like I knew my lines the best against that deck. But that
Well,
and then we went oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say there's a lot to be said for putting those reps in. Like you get that practice
Yeah.
time, like you talked about. That is maybe the most important, more important than the list of cards you're playing is the time you put in practicing it. But anyway, continue.
So we went to break after I saw the top eight. I felt good. I'm like, well, I'm in top eight. It is what it is. Just gonna do my best. And we went next door to try to eat at the Chinese place, and the Chinese place was a little too slow, so I didn't eat.
Oh
Um,
no.
but Keeb got some to go for me, so I did end up eating after we were done with Tevin. But I feel a little bad because I got a little tilted when we were playing Tevin because I thought I cost myself um, when we were playing with dumb play mistakes.
Well, what happened there?
So that was my first game in top eight, was against Tevin. And the first game went fine. I got everything I needed. I won pretty easy. He took a look at my list again. He's like, "Yep, this is going to be a battle. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get out of it." And I thought the same thing. I'm like, "I don't know if you'll be able to get out of it too." So I was a little overconfident there in the second game. Um, so the second game happened. He got the Tony Stark package rolling in
Ooh.
photo where he reset time, and
Mm-hmm.
um That's not great for surfer. It's not terrible, but it's not great either. So I didn't have my support, and he ended up stalling me out enough to where he could actually take game two, and he hit his top end, and I missed it. Um, and then in the third game, I'm like, okay, I can still win. I just got to take care of business. So I got my hand. I looked at it. I had the earth, the two locations that I need, and the two locations I needed to level. I'm like, oh, perfect. This is exactly a hand I want. Um, and then I leveled on turn one, and I said pass. And I didn't attack his bark monster.
Now,
Um,
what was the logic there? Or was it just pure misplay?
it was just a pure misplay.
Oh
I wanted to
no.
attack. I wanted to attack, but I'm like, oh, this is going perfectly. I don't need to do a thing. And then I leveled and I said pass. And the rest of that game, he was hitting Scullies. And I was looking at that bark monster like you should have been dead a while ago. Because if you get two wounds on the bark monster, Scully doesn't do anything for him
Mm-hmm.
without paying your Earth, which he only had one Earth for Scully, which was the free one. Um, and so I'm like, okay, that's not good. But I was so mad. I'm like, um, that's all right. I just got to keep hitting the bark monsters as much as I can. So they were hiding. They were hiding. He was stalling it. And then we got to like turn five, I think. I was ready to play an invisible boy. Um, I had Surfer in the front, so I pulled Surfer to the back. Um, I took my hand off, and I hadn't recruited yet, and that is a big no no.
Oh
And
my
that's just a bad
goodness.
habit that I formed. That's just a bad habit that I formed in practice, where I move them around before I actually recruit stuff.
Yeah, you don't want to do
Because
that.
in my mind, I see it as like one big phase, one big build phase, and I'm still doing the build phase until I say I'm done formatting. But yeah, no, you can't do that at tournaments. So I got called out on that, and I was not mad at Tevin. I was mad at myself, and it happened again later against Fern because
Oh my
it's a really
goodness.
bad habit. Yeah, it's a really bad habit. That I've been trying to cut out. Butcher always tells me, ready, recover, ready, recover. Make sure you do it all the steps. And it's something that I found out that I need to practice more. So even after you win, the practice never stops. But
Yeah, maybe
um
like take a shot of Tabasco every time you make that mistake in practice, and you'll
yeah,
create a
for
real
real.
strong
Yeah,
aversion to it.
yeah. So it's just a bad habit that I formed, and um I missed my recruits, and I was down on wounds at this point, and I knew he had Quicksilver coming because I hadn't seen one yet, and the odds were that he's going to put one down, and that's not what you want to see. So I'm like, I literally sold this game just because I didn't attack and I didn't formate right. So I thought I had cost myself, but I ended up getting the negative zones and healing and then coming back on him. So it was a tough game. That was probably the toughest game of versus I had played for sure.
Were you still doing this on an empty stomach?
Yeah. So that was before I had a chance to eat. Um but I squeaked out against Tevin. Tevin's a great player. We came in around the same time. But he shot off like a rocket and I had to grind. So but we have this joke in Buckeye that he's the shake and bake to any Buckeye that plays them in top eight, where he gives us the push forward we need. Like Ricky Bobby, what's the other race car driver in Talladega Nights?
I watched that movie too long ago. I could not tell you any of their names. I know what you're talking about, but I don't remember the names of the characters.
Yeah, John C. Yeah, whoever John C. Riley plays, his best friend, where he bumps his car so he can get a boost forward.
Mm-hmm.
So that's our running joke is that he's the John C. Riley of Team Buckeye. If you play him in top eight, you're going to go on and win.
Well, that prophecy certainly came true this time.
Yeah. So, but we're gonna get Tevin. We're gonna get Tevin a win here. We'll John C. Riley him next time.
I mean, his consistency and his improvement as a player, yeah, he's going to be in the champion. He's going to get one of those big cards sooner than later.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. Tevin's also a great guy. But yeah,
True.
so we were finished with that game. Bert and Patrick were still playing, so I did get a chance to eat while Bert and Patrick were playing. Um, and then it was just a matter of waiting. And then I played Patrick and Dark Phoenix. I really don't know how I won. I think Patrick should have won. Um, because the first game, I'm like, all right, I'm probably gonna lose, but at least we have game two. And then I was at 6 wounds, and I'm like, oh wait, I can win. I got the negative zone here. I can actually win. And then I did. I won the first game. But I thought for sure because I was hungry every game, and you don't want to see that.
Hmm.
I mean, Lee Surfer's an 8-8, and he's a good fighter, but I mean, eventually those earths that you have to spend to bounce the big characters back to their hand run out. So you can always just build a wall, and Dark Phoenix is tough to get to give her a hunger virus. I would love to, because that's what I was thinking the whole time. As long as I get Dark Phoenix the hunger virus back, I'll be fine. Which I never did. I think except for one game. So yeah, so we went to game two against Patrick, and this was the one game I didn't hit my Earth, so I was stuck on level two. A level two hungry Silver Surfer is a lot worse than a level three hungry Silver Surfer. That's for sure.
Yeah, he doesn't get his health buff till level 3, right?
Well, he has his health buff, but he's only a 5/5, so
Oh, okay.
he's still
Well,
at
that's
seven
still not
wounds.
great.
But yeah, but when you didn't level up to turn two right away, and then you miss your Earth, and you spent your one blue that you had, it's not great. So I'm just like, all right, that game was bad. I missed my Earth. It happens, and we'll just go to game three. So game three happens. Same thing. Basically, I get ahead on wounds because you hit Dark Phoenix while you can
Hmm.
until she builds her wall.
Yeah, starting at a
Which she always
3-3, she's very punchable early game.
yeah. So you hit her as much as you can for sure. And uh, so Patrick got his wall going again. He did get hungry. He did get me hungry, and then she ended up leveling. Uh, because we put the 20 resources down, and I forget who gave it to her, but my whole board was hungry, so I was able to get back to her, and I did give her the hunger virus. So at that point, he had to push her to the front. Um, I think she was on like 5 wounds. I was on 6. Um, I had invented a negative zone already. I hadn't played it yet because I didn't have an earth. But I drew into a green on that turn. So she was at 5. I was at 6. I was gonna die that turn. Um, unless I hit something or unless I won, because he was just gonna play Thor again and hit me.
Hmm.
That I bounced. I think it was Zombie Thor that I bounced back to his hand. He was just gonna play it again. So that was my last turn, but I drew into the green. I played the negative zone. I hit Dark Phoenix and I flipped her back up with the green and I hit her again and won. So I snuck it out against Patrick.
That's wild.
I don't Yeah, I don't think he saw that one coming, and I'm like, yeah, that I probably should have lost that one. So whatever happens from here is definitely the whipped cream on top of the cherry, on top of the topping. So uh that was the second round of top eight. At this point it was getting pretty late, so they asked um Vern and I if we wanted to play a best of three. I knew I was going to go first because I was the top seed, so I deferred to Vern on that one, and they decided that we would just do winner takes all, best of one. So that game was a game. It wasn't a well played versus game, I would say, but
What time are
It
we
was fun.
talking? I know you said it was late, but this is
It it was probably 10:30, 10:45.
yeah, that's getting pretty late after a long day.
Yeah. Yeah, we started around 11:30, I think.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it was a long day for sure at this point, and, um, I wanted to let Vern have the final say so because, I mean, I'm gonna go first, obviously, in the first match.
Well,
So,
that super favors you if it's a best of one.
yeah. So I once he said that, all right, I'm like, at least I know what I have to do. If I win, I win. If I lose, I lose. So we went into that game. I got out to a big lead on Vern. I got my Earth. He didn't. I stood together his blue to go looking for an Earth. I built my board a little bit more. He was missing his locations. I think it was like turn 4 or 5. I had 3 characters on the board and I had a stand together in my hand and he went to level and I didn't even know, like I didn't even think about playing the stand together to stop him from level protecting Zenlaw and leveling.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like, "Oh yeah, that's fine. You can level." And
Well,
then he went to go, yeah, he went. So what I was doing all day is I'm like, I probably can't stop him from leveling because I wouldn't have enough characters. Um, but I can stop when they pay the blue to look for the earth. So when he went to pay the blue, I just stopped that instead. So I slowed him down
sure.
a little bit more, but he did end up leveling. And then once he leveled to 3, it was a game at that point, and my characters decided not to show up anymore. I think I got my Mr. Fantastic on turn 7 was all the help I had. And he got Nova Cord off the table
Oh,
on
jeez.
defense. I put him in the back. Yeah. So I paid the red to have him plasticity, whatever it's called.
Sure.
And I put him in the back so he'd be extra safe because I needed to invent the negative zone to finish the game. And I put my surfer in front with him in the back, and I'm like, all right, he at least he has shrink and tough, so I'm gonna get this negative zone and hopefully shut the door on Vern here. And but no, he hit my surfer and then he attacked in and he Nova Cord before Sir Fantastic could shrink, and then at that point that gave him enough time to catch up where we were tied on wounds again, even though I had jumped out to a huge lead on him. Um, So maybe I got too overconfident at that point, but I'm like, okay, Vern's back in it. This is good. This is a good game. That's what I was most glad about is that at least it was a good game, and Vern had a fighting chance in the one game that we were gonna play. Um, and then I did end up getting my negative zone the the next turn, but that was only because Vern I couldn't hit his Mr. Fantastic, but Vern was kind enough to only draw cards with Mr. Fantastic and not invent when he could have.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, I'm sure he knows now that you have to invent before you draw. But it's one of those things that just gets baked in while you're playtesting. Your normal lines just take over at some point
Yeah, it's kind of
where
like a
he's like, all right,
training
go to
scar.
draw.
If you don't practice
Yeah,
it
it's kind of
right,
like a
then
training
when you're
style.
at the tournament, you do it the way you practice it, which is wrong, and that can really hurt you, as you've illustrated a couple of times
Yeah,
during this conversation.
yeah. So I mean, I was doing the same thing just in a different way. And Vern went to draw his for turn, and David would say, "All right, stroke of genius," because once you draw, you can't invent.
Mm-hmm.
With Mister Fantastic, at least. So if he gets one of those negative zones, I probably lose. But I mean, if I stand together his level, he probably loses anyway. So I mean, that's why it was one of the most unclean games of verses, I would say. It
Well,
wasn't pretty, but it was a win.
sometimes it's a brawl, you know?
Yeah, it was a fight, and we did it to ourselves mostly. But shout out to Vern and all the Apex guys; they're always great.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Tough competitors on the playmats and great guys outside of it. Um,
Yeah.
so I remember earlier you mentioned that there was another missed drop situation with Vern.
Mhm.
Did that
Yeah,
contribute to his ability to catch back up to you because you missed a character recruit, or how impactful was that to this
I think
final?
so. Yeah, I think so because I wanted to play Invisible Boy, to shut off his Invisible Boy, but I mean, neither of us Invisible Boyed if remember correctly, so it didn't bite me too much. And at that point, I was just happy to be there. So I'm like, all
Sure.
right, I missed my Invisible Boy. I forgot to recruit. I'm ahead like 5-1 at this point. So I felt pretty good still. Um, but yeah, it doesn't help that I did the same thing again where I moved my character before I recruited.
And the same character missed apparently both times.
Yeah. Yeah,
um,
well, it's always the same thing. It's always the same thing. If I'm going to put a flyer in the front, I always put my MC that has range in the back. So it's just a common thing like, oh, I'm putting him back here, so make room for the flyer in the front. But that's the way I do it in my mind, but you can't do it that way.
yeah, yeah. Well, given that you ended up with the intended result with this deck list, it may be hard to look back over it and make any alterations, but are there any cards that you feel like, I probably could have trimmed that and I would have been better suited for the matchup, or any cards that you really think you needed to include? Like, are there any changes you would have made to the list?
Actually, no. I think that list was probably the best that I could get it. Actually, for a long time, I didn't have Brainstorm in it. But Brainstorm it was actually huge. Um, especially in the finals against Vern. Because I didn't see the need for a 1/1 on turn two that would never draw cards because I would never have characters out, really. So I'd just be depending on the opponent's characters.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and plus, I wanted to save the yellows for Doctor Doom anyway. And Doctor Doom and Invisible Boy, I'm like, I don't need to spend this yellow on turn two. That's never going to go off. But Butcher again said, "Hey, you're if you get in a bind, it might be nice to draw some cards late." And it was definitely nice to draw cards late. And she's great at trading with Ganymede. So I sent her into Ganymede quite a few times to clear my path for Surfer.
Oh, nice.
So I'm sure that was always fun. I would just crash in Ganymede and but yeah, so Blind Spot or I think it's Blind Spot, it's their daughter. No,
Yeah.
not Blind Spot, Brains sorry. Yeah, Brainstorm. Wrong two drop. But yeah, so that was a huge include. But I feel like In Good Hands saved me against the Bark Brothers, so that was definitely huge. I don't think I could change that list at all. I I tinkered with it quite a bit, and that's the best I felt like I could get it.
Well, I mean, that's the feeling that you earn when you know you put in enough time practicing, at least in my opinion. And it sounds like you definitely did that.
Yeah, it definitely was the most practice I've ever done. But it was worth it. Even if I hadn't won, it would have been worth it.
Yeah, but it's extra worth it when you're the champ, right?
Yeah, it's extra worth it.
Well, that kind of brings us to the end of the outline that I had for everything I wanted to ask, but I do want to give you an opportunity if there's anything else about the event that you want to touch on that we haven't hit on yet. Was there anything else?
Um, no, it was a great event. Scott's always great, great host for everyone. Um, so glad that he gives out little extra prizes too that we normally don't get from Upper Deck, like last year with the play mats, this year with the play tubes. My wife's probably not too happy about another play mat coming into this house, but we'll deal with that when that happens.
Fair enough. All right. Well, I guess to close things off, then I do want to give you a chance to plug, promote, shout out anything you'd like here at the end of the show.
Shout out to Team Buckeye. Everyone should be reading Rollins' blog if they already don't. I don't know why you wouldn't. Every Thursday he
True.
puts out deck. Yeah. I think David and Roland are doing a fight night sort of thing, a street fight thing in July. That'll be fun.
That's exciting.
People should go for that. Yeah, they're doing Underworld versus Defenders, and they're gonna do 4 decks at once or something. I don't know. It's wild. They're talking about it. They've talked about it.
Well, we'll have to get one of them to
So
come on here and explain it to me.
yeah, I'm sure they would be happy to. But yeah, shout out to D Rob for all he does for the community, really. He's a great judge and he's like the one we have.
Yeah.
So he doesn't need to go to all these events, but he's kind enough to run the Buckeye League for us and he's kind enough to judge for us all and answer all our dumb judge questions in the rules section. So yeah, definitely shout out to them and shout out to Matt and Kevin Butcher, who were on Surfer first. They would be remiss if I didn't mention that.
Well, yeah, giving credit to the folks who helped you come up with the ideas. I mean, I think that's part of your an important part of the victory speech as well. Is shout out to the team
Yeah.
who helped you get there, of course.
Yep. Matt and Kevin. We talked about it a lot. He said no one bought into it, but I bought into Surfer right away. So
All right. Well, hey, I really appreciate you taking the time to come talk about your victory. Of course, congratulations on the win, and we'll have to have you back on the show when you win the next one.
sounds good. Thank you.
All right. Go win some games.